says to their parent, you abused me when I was a child, the parent's knees turn to jelly. Imagine your kid accuses you of abusing him or her in childhood. Amy Smith did that. Amy Smith is a college student in 1989, and you're a pretty sick young woman at the time. You were bulimic, and you were also engaging in self-destructive behavior. You were, among other things, scratching your wrist, a kind of an early sign of self. This is, let's just say that Amy, you don't mind, I have your permission to show. Okay. Here's the legacy of some days in which Amy was a very, very sick young woman. So she's in the hospital in Houston, right?
Right.
And so you're going to therapy, or what's happening? Do you sit around in a big circle on chairs, or are you getting one-on-one treatment? I assume you were medicated and all that. You were really... Huh? Everything. Everything. Incidentally, you're certainly doing well with your eating disorders. It looks like you're putting on a little weight.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're feeling better. Okay,
yeah.
All right.
Doing great.
Okay, so tell us, in one of your therapy sessions, what happens?
Well, this is a long process, and actually this
First of all, you must have been very depressed. You're crying all the time, I assume, huh? You're kind of dead-eyed. You weren't on any junk, were you? You weren't doing...
No.
You're just real sick, right. Emotionally shot.
Right.
To the point of actually putting a razor blade on your arm.
Well, actually, this didn't start until I got into this therapy.
You mean after the therapy you started hurting yourself?
Right, right. Before I was depressed, and I had an eating disorder, and that was it.
Okay.
So far.
Okay, now let's get to the point here. What in the world made you accuse your parents of abusing you, sexually abusing you in childhood?
Over a long process, I was in the hospital for 2.5 months the first time, and they told me that I had all the symptoms of somebody who had been abused, and they also told me that I had to go back and find these memories and relive them in order for me to ever get better, and I wanted more than anything to get better. I mean, I had left college, and I felt like such a failure, and my self-esteem was just nothing.
Were you 18? How old were you?
I was 18, yeah.
Okay.
And my parents were 400 miles away, and they started giving me these clues that I had been abused, and then this really happened to a bunch of us on this unit.
A bunch of you on the unit. More than one white coat said this to you in the psych ward? You're in a psych ward, I assume.
Yes.
The next thing to a rubber room, you got the locks on the door, and that's where we want people who are as sick as you were at the time. More than one of the hospital personnel suggested sexual abuse in childhood?
Yes.
And how does this kaboom come up like this, or do they lead you into it, or what?
It's a very gradual process, and it's over a period of time, and it's also with a lot of other patients who went through the exact same thing in groups and whatnot. They told me when I would hear somebody talking about their horrible experience, which may or may have not been true, I would get very upset, but because I was depressed and I was emotional. And
you're listening to another patient describe sexual abuse in his or her childhood.
Right, okay. And then they told me since I could relate to that so intensely that means that I went through something similar. And I felt like I was under a lot of pressure. My insurance was limited, and I had very short time to find out everything I needed to know in order to get better.
So if we can if we can create then a real monster, such as child abuse, voila, we can fix this. And then, in the traditional Freudian way, you'll explode in tears, you'll go through all kinds of Kleenex boxes, you'll just be horribly depressed, and you'll cry, you won't be able to see, you won't be able to talk, but it'll be over.
Right, but it didn't end, and that was the problem. It just got worse and worse, and then they convinced me that I had multiple personalities. They convinced me that I was involved in satanic abuse, and my behavior got worse. I started self-mutilating. I got very suicidal, and it just, went down from there.
And then, did you finally get out of the hospital then?
Mm-hmm.
Is that when you left voluntarily, or when you left? Wasn't there a time when they kept you in? You weren't allowed to leave, or you waited until your insurance ran out?
At one point, my insurance ran out, and they committed me to a state facility. I begged them to, because I was such a mess. I knew that I would not exist. I would not survive on my own. And then I came back to that hospital later when I had more insurance.
And how long in this process, when did they tell you that you should tell your parents? Imagine now, this is part of the healing. You call your folks and say, I know, I remember. you were claiming, or they were suggesting that you remembered something that happened when you were 6 months old?
Yeah. And
They made you believe you remembered.
yes.
And then they said you should tell your parents. Do I understand this?
Yes.
And you willingly did that. What'd you do, call them on the phone?
No, I invited my parents to come up and have a therapy session. And at that point, I confronted them and told them that I never wanted to see them again. And I thought I was doing the right thing. All the patients told me I was so brave for doing this. The therapists were so proud of me, and I took such a big step to take care of myself. And so I told my parents I never wanted to see them again.
I mean, were they able to walk out of the room? I mean, I can't. Was this a total shock to them?
Yes.
Your father's an OBGYN?
Yes.
Physician?
Yes. He's he, by the way, was very active in a number of organizations to promote public education of child abuse and of domestic violence.
And you're saying to yourself, my dad is such a do-gooder. He's politically active in this issue. He wants to stop it. He doesn't want... And they would say... And you're telling that to the doctors. And they would say what?
They said that that was a front that he had to use in order to have this kind of second hidden life, that he compensated by doing all these good things in the society.
So Jack the Ripper joins this church choir, so you don't know what he's doing.
It's just when you get in there and you're there every day, all day, in such intense therapy, it's really traumatic, and your psychological boundaries just aren't there. I mean, there's no way for you to be objective at all. It's really difficult.
And when then did you start to say, wait a minute, wait a minute? When did the yellow light start to go on for you?
After I had been out of therapy with these doctors and this particular hospital for about a year, actually, it was around about a year ago that I started to think, well, you know, I don't think this stuff is really real. And it's something that I always questioned. I asked the doctors every day, you know, are you sure I'm not making this up? Are you sure it's not possible for me to make this up? And of course they said, yes, there's no way you can do that. And there's no reason why you would do that. And I started finally to realize that this was not real. And I came to that acceptance that, you know, that it was not real. And then I became very depressed because I was like, what have I done? I'm such a horrible person to have done all this, and how could I come up with these things? And that's when I got severely depressed and finally got some help that I really needed. And
a doctor who said, all right, now, and now you're on a different track, so to speak.
Right.
A doctor that's not trying to encourage you to say, this is what happened, this is why you're sick.
Exactly.
And then you called your folks, what?
I saw an article in the paper that was about a girl who had been in the exact same hospital. She described her experiences were identical to mine, and I made a copy of that article, and that's when I knew it wasn't all my fault, that there were other factors involved. And I made a copy and sent it to my parents. And then we've been talking since then. That was about a month and a half ago, I guess.
So for a month and a half, you've been talking to your parents.
Mm-hmm.
I assume there's been a lot of tears in these phone calls.
Yeah.
And you've convinced your parents that you now know that they did no such horrible thing
Right.
to you in childhood. And did your parents, I mean, did they just were they relieved, or did they understand, do you think?
Yes, they had been networking with a number of parents who were going through the same thing. So they had just about started to lose hope, I think, but they did. When I did mail that article, they knew that this was over and we could start over again.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very excited.
Right. Well, we are pleased to, with the permission of everybody in the family, be eyewitnesses to, that you have given us permission to be the eyewitness to a reunion with your mom. Her mom is here and hasn't seen her since this sudden and, well, this evolutionary discovery that much of what ailed her was provoked by people who wanted her to believe something that happened in childhood in order to fix her ailments now. None of it was true. And I know she loves you, and you know that. That's even more important, and she knows that you love her. Here's your mom, Wanda Smith. Mrs. Smith, come on in here, please. Well, We do feel a little bit uncomfortable looking on something that's this personal, but we know that you've allowed us to do this because you think, first of all, there's a whole bunch of people out there that are being mauled unnecessarily, needlessly. Well, we can only speculate on what goes through a parent's mind. You had to be, first of all, scared to death about your daughter before any of this came. I mean, you knew that she was cutting herself in.
Yes, she was getting worse as she was getting in the hospital, and we kept talking to the doctors, and we threatened to take her out, and they said, well, you'd have to take her to a state institution, and they were horrible, they were awful, you really don't want your precious daughter there. And so we said, well, no, you know, we want to do the right thing, so we left her there. And a little bit after that is when I got a call from Amy telling me to come up, because I think they were getting afraid that we were going to pull the money, pull the plug. So they had me come up, and I think the reasoning, I don't know, but I think the reasoning was that if they really scared us, that we'd pay anything to get our daughter back, and we didn't.
You think there's a marketing influence here?
They got a $250,000 insurance and $60,000 to $80,000 out of us.
So that'd be $250,000 covered, and then you and your husband came up with $60,000 to $80,000 in addition when the coverage ran out.
Right. Well, yeah. So we were paying $1,000 a day at one time.
So you can be real sick on Thursday, and if your insurance runs out at midnight, you're pretty well, you're well on Friday and dismissed.
Well, what we did, we had her sent to a state institution. We had a court order, a judge signed it, took her away from the hospital, and put her in San Antonio, the state hospital. She's supposed to be there for 6 weeks to 6 months. She's there 3 days. Somehow she got out in 3 days. I don't know how.
Where was the place where you were encouraged to believe that you were sexually abused in childhood? Was that the state, or was it a private?
No,
that was the private facility.
Private, yeah.
So your husband looked at you looked at each other. I mean, when you
it was devastating. It was that day in Houston, my heart was cut out. I died a little. Part of me died.
And you are prepared to tell this audience that you're really never going to be the same. However grateful you may be to have your daughter back now, you're never going to. This is not going to leave. This is flypaper on your forever.
Forever, right. Well, yeah, after I got home from Houston, we had to go tell our friends. We were afraid we'd be arrested. I mean, criminal charges would be, she would bring charges against us. And my husband would be arrested. His career would have been over. And our friends...
Sure, who's going to go to an OBGYN who's got this?
Right. Well, and our friends, she said that we gave her to our friends, so we had to warn them they might be arrested too. So it was terrible. I mean, it was devastating. It was a nightmare. You were living a nightmare, and there was no way out. You couldn't wake up.
This audience will have questions for you, and you've already got the lines jammed here. We should not be surprised. Yeah. Wow, wonderful. You've got your daughter back.
Yes. Huh? Thank God, yes.
Yeah. In a moment, we'll meet another similar circumstance. That is to say, a young woman who accused her parents. Her parents are here. We'll ask them how they felt about it when they were first accused. How is it that an otherwise wonderful person with a otherwise normal childhood would come up with this kind of charge against a parent? You'll also meet a young woman who accused her parents of sexually abusing her when she was a child, and later on realized, as Amy did, that this was not true, and her parents have refused to accept her apology. They are still estranged, and we'll meet her in just a moment.
To be part of the audience, please send a postcard to Donahue Tickets, care of NBC, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, New York, 10112. Remember, postcards only, please.
This is Debbie David. Hi. Hi. Glad you're here. 1989?
89.
89. She's not feeling so hot, and she's moody and blue like a lot of us. And you had a hysterectomy in '89, so there goes the baby basket. And who are you? I don't know. I mean, I want to say that was German. Was that involved?
No, I needed the hysterectomy, and I went in for it. The problem was, afterwards, they weren't giving me the hormones I needed. So I call it PMS times 100.
They took your ovaries and all those hormone makers, yeah?
Right.
So you've got now a brain chemistry that's altered, and you're a little wired or down and up, or I don't know what
you're... Very moody, up and down, angry.
Very good.
Ready to kill,
really
crying.
Hostile and angry. Okay. You go to a shrink, good for you.
Right.
You see him 4 months and you're feeling a little better.
Right.
And you say, okay, Doc, I'm finished.
I like to walk out of here now. I think I'm doing fine. And he says, I don't think you've played all your cards. And I'm going, I haven't played all my cards? What do you mean I haven't played all my cards? And I go home, and that's going on in my mind, and I'm wondering about it.
You should also say you're a paying customer, too.
Yes, I'm a paying customer, no assurance.
But the point is, we don't want to, I don't want to make, you have to wonder. I mean, after all, you're a patient, you're X dollars for the 50 minutes, or however long the session. All right.
So I'm wondering what is he meaning by this? The next time I go in, he plays some word games with me and mentions the word sexual abuse, and I go, no. And he mentions it again, I go, no. I'm very annoyed at that point. And it wasn't until after that I end up with this dream, and then he says to me, oh, by the way, dreams at that point were very important. I was reporting dreams. Dreams had significance. They had definite meaning. And I tell him the dream, and he says to me, you were sexually abused, probably by your grandfather. And I freaked. I totally freaked. And then he gives me statistics and talks about why I don't remember.
And you, as painful and as freaked as you were, you can't let it go. It may be true.
No, couldn't let it go. I could no longer go to work. I dwelled on it. When? How? Who did this? I called my parents. Who could have done this? There was nothing that they knew that could help me. They became very devastated. You know, the therapist is saying your grandfather.
Well, that's first she was searching out to see who it was before she blamed grandfather or my dad. And then after she searched and searched, then she come up with what was the grandfather? Because my dad had done it. And then it led on from there.
It led on to what? Other accusations? Against other people?
It led on to being satanic ritually abused.
So the devil worship, and you had all that stuff, and
right.
You didn't make this up, somebody else did, or helped you, or?
Well, I ended up with a different therapist, this one therapist, after he did this, and I couldn't remember. After he told me I was sexually abused, I couldn't remember, so he refers me to therapist number 2, who will help me remember. And he has me doing these exercises and really paying attention to dreams, reporting dreams. I'm in a group of other women. Then I go in and he does this little thing called sourcing. And actually it is hypnosis. And when I came out of there, I visualized, I remember him saying, and are there candles? Yeah, there's candles. Are there people? Yeah, there's people. And I visualized it. I saw it, in my head. I walked out of there fully believing that my grandfather was involved in a satanic cult, and he hung me up in this room, and he had people rape me and pour blood on me and hot wax. And
was there a baby involved here too as well? Was there a...
later on it became worse, and
was there a sacrifice or a...
Yeah, I ended up thinking that I had a baby when I was 13 years old that was sacrificed in a church.
Well, she even told us that there was altars set up around on the hillside where they sacrificed babies.
Yeah,
it was specific, though, Pop, is what you're saying.
Right.
Her detailed...
I heard her, tell us that. That was before she started blaming anybody else. That was what she's still blaming Grandpa.
But then it moved to you and Mom, did it?
Later on, it moved to us.
And more involved as time went on. My mother abused me when I was 4 months old. And that's at the time that I confronted them.
You're the one that is supposed to have been able to remember the 4 months. I confused the two cases.
Right.
4 months you're supposed to remember. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
blue wallpaper.
Yeah, her grandfather was supposedly raped her at 4 months.
Yeah. Well, Mom, how'd you walk through this one? I mean, of all the parental nightmares, this is not one you anticipated.
No, I was very shocked. She called me up one day and she says, Mom, can I talk to you? And I said yes, and so
Yeah,
she
but-
came up.
Wait a minute. There's more to that before that, because before they come and started blaming us, it just worked right on up. He blamed my dad first for coming to sexual abuse with my dad and all kinds of rituals, and then other people, and then later on, it was later on that she come and blamed us for it.
Right.
And go ahead.
Go ahead, Mom.
And she came up and she told
There's one host on the show.
told me that she wanted to talk to me.
She told you what?
She wanted to talk to me,
Right.
so I said, all right. So she came up, and when she came in the house, the first thing she said to me was, I'm taking my life in my own hands by being here. And I said, why? And she said, because you could kill me. And I just was shocked. My mouth fell open. I didn't know what to say at first, so we went in the living room and we sat down. And she proceeded to tell me, she said, what would you do if I told you that Dad raped me? And I didn't know what to say at first. I just went into shock. And then she told me I was in denial. And I said, well, tell me what denial means, because I didn't know.
You got to get in on the lingo here now, Mom. Yeah.
Well, I was in shock.
Yeah. Oh, I believe you. I mean, I assure you. There's not. You don't have to explain that to anybody.
I laid it out very calmly to her. You know, when she tried to tell me, no, that couldn't be possible, I just let her say that, and then I said, no, it's possible. I remember.
What about the violence? I don't understand the threat. The threat to why was your life endangered?
I was told that by going back to these people who had abused me in the occult, that they would get me because I was telling secrets.
Huh. So tell me, when did the healing begin?
Well, it got worse and worse, and I also was diagnosed with MPD. I was put on drugs.
MPD is memory?
Multiple personality disorder.
Oh, well, so and memory failure is also involved here, but all right,
but
okay.
I was on
You have a multiple personality disorder, yeah.
And
yeah, we all have that once in a while. That's we're selling a lot of that.
When I'm angry, okay, gee, I'm angry today, so I must be Stephanie. And that's
well, you were really very sick, we have to say, do we not? I mean, you were really...
I was on a thin thread of suicide continuously.
And what turned you around? When did it begin?
In April of 1992, I got kicked out of therapy, point blank, out the door, no more money, and...
You mean because you couldn't pay for it?
I couldn't pay for it anymore. I already owed him money. And he screamed at me, I'm not a missionary. I'm not a missionary, and I don't do this for free. And I was out the door. I'm still wondering, how was I going to get well? How am I going to get well? I need therapy. They told me I would never get well.
You just had therapy, and you ran out of money, and they kicked you out, so where do you go now?
Right. Where do I go now?
So where did you go now?
I thought that the only thing I needed to do was get my life together. The first thing I did was go off the drugs. And
off the drugs that were prescribed?
Off the drugs that were prescribed for me,
yeah.
Yes.
Just curiously, what were they? Do you mind telling me?
Klonopin and Cinequan.
Okay, we'll let the pharmacist decide whether that's a good... Go ahead. Go ahead.
I went through a 10-day, what I thought at the time was a 10-day flashback, where a flashback is when you are visually remembering stuff, your body is feeling it. I had been taught to pay attention to body memories, and everything that wrong with me was a body memory, and visualize what could be up around that body memory. I visualized when I went off these drugs as being electrocuted at 3 years old and being programmed in these chanting and everything.
Well, yeah.
Then it went on. I went back into therapy for a brief time this year, just this year, for about 3 months. And again, the therapist is trying to get me to go back and work with the MPD. I go, no way, I left.
So you had to get in charge of your own
I was getting
protocol.
better. I was getting better by this time.
We tried to tell her if she'd stop going to the therapist, she'd be fine on her own time. She wouldn't listen to us. Couldn't reach her.
But I'm struck by her. You're certain now that you were taken on a mind, your mind was jerked around something awful here.
Yeah, awful, jerked around.
And you must be impressed with your folks to have walked through this firestorm with you.
I'm thankful that nothing happened to them during the time, because I would have never been able to live through it.
You would have never been able to say, I'm sorry.
Right, and I would have had that the rest of my life.
And there is a healing now
There's a slow healing that's going on. I've been able to spend a week with them. We're hoping that in November I can take my kids to see them.
I haven't seen my grandkids yet. It's been 3.5 years.
Because she didn't want you to?
She told me I couldn't see them.
Of course not, because of all the terrible things.
I have to tell you how one of the things is that I knew definitely that this didn't happen, and that is I went into a medical doctor. She was a brand new doctor. She didn't know too much about my background. And I talked about the drugs. I said, when somebody goes off these drugs, what happens to them? Do they end up with body jerks and hallucinating and hearing voices outside their window and couldn't eat, couldn't sleep? She said, yeah. She said, you were going through severe withdrawal symptoms and you were having seizures. And it was like, oh my God, I didn't know. I thought I was having a flashback and these were body memories.
So if you're going to prescribe a drug for a patient, you have a responsibility not only to tell them what happens when they're off, but to be there when they get off.
Right.
So you were strung out and had no information at all as to what was causing your ups and downs and roller coaster. Yeah.
Right. And when I did go off the drugs, they wanted me to go back on them, and when I refused, they dropped my insurance.
And we'll be back in just a moment. Lisa Reinhardt is a marriage and family counselor, and we'll give you more time here in just a moment. But if you don't remember anything else, this professional woman wants you to know that no psychiatrist, therapist, psychologist, nobody with a couch, nobody interpreting dreams, nobody who's expecting to get in your head and make you feel better should ever what?
Should ever volunteer the information to the client, should ever tell them that they have been abused, should come up with the information.
Never should say, is it possible you've been abused in childhood?
I never do that.
Never hand them this.
Never do.
If it comes out, it comes out.
I wait patiently. I spend 6 months, a year, and put the pieces together if they come out and if the client believes they fit.
I have a question for the first young woman. Are you discovering what the underlying causes of your severe depression and bulimia are?
Gradually, yes. At this point, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm trying to put all my time and energy on putting my life back together and moving on.
For both of you, who recommended these medical, whether it's the clinic or the doctors that you saw?
Well, in the case of Amy, you were you had no power. You're a student, right? A freshman?
A sophomore.
Sophomore, so you're early away from home. It's an early experience away from home. So you took what, the biggest, nearest hospital?
No, the university doctors suggested this hospital, so it was the best in the country.
Mm-hmm. And you, Debbie?
He was suggested by a friend of mine because it was somebody that she'd heard of in the church.
Yes, let me just get this caller in here. Hello, caller. I'm sorry I didn't... Are you there? And thank you for waiting.
Hi, Phil. I wanted to talk to Amy and her mom.
Right.
First of all, congratulations on your reunion. I want to say that I feel terribly about what happened to you and your family. No one should ever have to go through this kind of an ordeal. My question is have you contacted an attorney to seek retribution for the emotional distress that this ordeal has caused you? This hospital should be put out of business.
Yes, we have. Amy contacted a lawyer.
So you'll attempt then on...
They said her case was too weak and they would not take it.
They did say that.
Well, they decided it was in my best interest not to go through the long, dreadful process of litigation.
But you do have, presumably there are other young people like yourself who were similarly influenced by this kind of therapy.
Absolutely, and the unit that I was on is now closed down.
It is closed down. So now America has to struggle with who's telling the truth and who isn't.
Right.
What kind of irresponsible professional behavior led to this, or what kind of real effective therapy allowed someone to remember? Because we do have, apparently there is a suppression, we don't want to consider it, and people walk around for half their lives with a brick in their chest.
Amy's was a lot like her case. It started out with a little bit about remembering being abused. She didn't blame us, but she talked to us about who could have abused her, and we had no idea. And then it eventually came to us.
Are you there, caller?
Yes, I am.
You wanted to say.
In 1989, I had a 12-year-old stepson make accusations about my wife and I, And as a result, he was coached by a social worker. We actually recorded her telling him that he would move to a nice big foster home and such. And he made accusations not of sexual abuse, but of physical and verbal abuse. And as a result, I wound up having to divorce this woman so that I wouldn't lose my children, because Department of Social Services was going to take them all away. So.
You're not surprised?
Well, I am somewhat shocked. I think the 80s was a time that child abuse and spousal abuse became known and apparent, and it seems that the 90s is a time for some balance. I mean, I'm not the expert on this. I don't think anyone is. But what I'm finding is that a lot of people do want a quick fix. We live in a quick fix society, and therapists will want to jump into something. I don't think many of them do it deliberately. They're not deliberately trying to harm someone, except for some who've been abused themselves can become perpetrators.
You know what the other
often
thing
happens.
is, too, is so much with sex abuse, they use a list of symptoms, and if you have this list of symptoms, then it equals.
See, they are handing that to you. And that's what I'm talking about, not to volunteer.
So here's the all-time indoor AAU champion for symptoms. I mean, she has an eating disorder, she's very depressed, and she's also starting to scratch her arm, as in, get ready, I'm going to kill myself. So you're saying that for a lot of therapists, this is an automatic, oh boy, she obviously was sexually abused in childhood.
Right.
And you're saying this is facile, it's too, you know, superficial.
Right.
Nobody knows, and we've got to stop encouraging people to think that's what happened.
Right.
One of my clients went to an eating disorder unit, and when she came back, she said, is it true that everyone with an eating disorder was sexually abused as a child? I thought, well, you know, that would be practically everyone. Of course it's not true. And many people with sexual abuse do develop eating disorders. I'm not here to say that a lot of people have not been abused, but I hope we can find a balance and not jump to these conclusions. This is horrendous.
And we'll be back in just a moment. Dawn Hubbard is the young woman about whom I spoke at the beginning of our program. Here is a woman who's a similar circumstance, having, I mean, there's just nothing worse you can tell your parents. You sexually abused me in childhood. I remember it. I know it happened. Don't argue with me. I don't ever want to speak to you. And she finally got smart and healed, and her parents will not. She wrote, said, I'm sorry, and they have not. You are still estranged. Is that right, Dawn?
Correct.
It was your aunt?
Right.
An aunt, tell them.
Well, about the age of 12 or 13, my aunt, or my biological father's sister, it was my stepfather that I had accused, had told me that she thought I had been molested because I showed all the symptoms of it, because I acted like she did when she was 12 or 13, right. And she said that she had been molested by my grandfather. At that time, she explicitly described to me what she thought had occurred, and had given me a book to read, which kind of enforced everything that she had said to me, saying that, you know, you don't have to remember being abused. If you feel like you were abused by someone, then you were. A bunch of things of that nature. And after that, I started getting nightmares about being abused.
You didn't believe it at first, but your aunt told you that you showed all the signs of the abuse.
Right. I never thought of it, but once she had talked to me about it, and once I had read the book, I just started getting these terrible nightmares about it.
At 16, Dawn's mother was snooping through her things and found the poetry that you had written.
Right. My way of dealing with it, since I was underage, my aunt really, really wanted me to go into therapy. But because I was a minor, by law, I wasn't allowed to without my parents' consent.
Right.
I'm so glad that it didn't.
Yeah, after hearing this.
Yeah, exactly. My way of dealing with it was to write poetry.
And your mother came across the poetry.
Right.
And how revealing was the poetry?
It was very explicit as to what my dreams were.
And there were dreams of sexual abuse at the hand of an older relative, right?
I specifically said my stepfather in it.
So you were writing down, with specific reference to sexual transgressions brought against you by your stepfather.
Correct.
You believed this?
Yes, with all my heart I believed it, and I think that's like one of the hardest things about this is you go through all the emotions of believing that you were abused, and then you realize that it didn't happen, and you go through all the anger of realizing that this was put in your head.
Yeah, how did you realize it, Dawn? I mean, did you get some help professionally?
My parents' response to my accusations, they went on kind of a letter writing campaign. Anyone who knew me, like over 3,000 people, everyone in my school,
got a letter.
Got a letter from my parents. Actually, about a series of 7 or 9, somewhere around there, explaining what FMS was and pretty much saying...
Failed memory syndrome.
False memory syndrome.
False memory syndrome. The new Honecker now, this is about thinking you remember something that you didn't.
Right. So
your parents apparently, as a defensive move, because they felt you were going to somehow go public, they notified 3,000 people that their daughter was accusing them of sex abuse, and this wasn't true, and you're suffering from false memory. So, so everybody in your school got a letter from your parents?
Everyone in my school got a letter.
So you're walking down the hallway, there's the crazy girl who's got the bad memory, that, you know, who was sexually abused. So either way, this is awful.
Right. And the thing is, when my parents wrote the letters, they weren't letters saying, you know, I want to help my child, I think they have this. They were letters saying, my child is a threat to you, my child is a threat to society, my child is a bad child, but I think she has FMS. And that was, if my child were ever to develop FMS, I would make them aware of what FMS is, but I would not...
You would not notify the whole damn neighborhood, no.
Right.
And you have since written a letter of apology to your parents.
Right. All along, my mother had told me she would not have any contact with me unless I wrote a letter of recantment. I went to her house and dropped off a letter that was extremely apologetic, explaining what I thought had occurred to me. You know,
you're not guilty, Mom, I'm sorry.
Not my stepfather.
You're not guilty, Dad, I'm sorry.
Right.
This was wrong, this is what happened to me, I'm sorry, I know this has been painful, please let's heal, or whatever you said.
Right.
And what they do?
I brought it to their house, and about a couple days later, I got a court summons saying my mother had charged me with criminal trespassing. On her property. Right.
So your parents essentially have said what, then, to your apology? That they can't reconcile with you because?
Because I've burned too many bridges and I'm not in enough pain yet.
That is such a...
So your attempt to reconcile is ongoing, is it?
Correct. I would do anything in the world to have a relationship with my parents. I love them deeply, and I care about them a great deal. I'm heartfully sorry what happened, but I did not do it intentionally. I believed what I was saying at that time.
I believe you were.
And you do. You totally.
You do, sure.
You totally 100%
You believe it.
believe
You believe it.
Any question that you have, they have an answer for why you're questioning it.
And we'll be back in just a moment.
For a transcript of Donahue, send $3 to Journal Graphics, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203, or call 303-831-9000. To order a video cassette for only $24.95, just call 1-800-FOR-VIDEO.
Yes, you wanted to ask. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I want to ask Dawn, the last person. I was wondering if you still talk to your aunt at all?
I hadn't talked to her at all since I realized I had false memory syndrome until a couple weeks ago, and she's very angry because she thinks I'm in denial now.
Over here.
For the therapist, do all states use the same criteria to license your profession?
No, they don't.
I want to know, where's Amy's dad while all this is going on? Do you have any relationship with him now?
I'm going home after this show to see the rest of my family.
I wanted to ask you, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. How are your children been affected by this?
They were affected very strongly. It was assumed because my father abused me, they also were abused. And so they believe they were too.
I wanted to know, where is your husband or father of the children?
Well, my husband and I are separated, which happened in the interim of this, and hopefully maybe we'll get back together.
Yes.
Do you all have siblings?
Brothers,
I have two brothers.
You have, yes, one did and one didn't believe you. Do I understand that?
Yes.
The older one did and the younger one didn't.
Yes.
So, you know, you know, the whole family has to line up. So you got to take a side here.
Yeah.
This is awful.
You take a side. You're either all for me or you're you're against me.
Yeah.
I just want to ask Amy, like, how did you come to realize that your parents really didn't abuse you?
Well, it was the same. Every day I was asking the question, could this be real? And for a while I was getting the answers from the doctors. And once I stopped seeing them, I didn't get those answers anymore. And then I started to realize that it was wrong.
Child sexual abuse is a cause célèbre right now. You make the accusation, it's automatically believed. The question for the therapist is what kind of criteria is used to see if these people are making it up or if they've been indoctrinated?
Well, we've had plenty of help, or plenty of practice here. McMartin and the Carolina case should teach us that the court is hardly the place to be resolving this, but at the moment, if there's going to be an action, it's the only place. It not only, once an abuse is, an accusation is made, it becomes exponential. Pretty soon, more people are involved. And then pencils and penetrations and horrible, and you would want to say, what, is this?
Yeah, one of the things, I work with a police department in Los Angeles, and I met with the chief recently. We talked about what power they have and with weapons, but therapists have so much power to destroy human beings and families, and I don't know about what happens once it gets that far, it becomes legal. But I know what I do is to, as I've said earlier, I watch for 6 months, I listen for a year, I put pieces together, I notice unusual physical, if someone breaks out in a vaginal, rectal rash just for no reason, I just start to notice those things.
But even under those circumstances, you would not introduce the idea of child sexual abuse to a patient.
Never.
The patient has to mention it to you without encouragement or provocation.
And even then, I used to send them to a woman who knew so much about it. Most of the time, they came back, it wasn't an it. See, people want a hook sometimes.
They do.
If it's that, oh, then I can clear that up and I'll be okay.
Yeah. It's like doctors love sore throats because they know how to fix them.
I'd rather it wasn't child abuse. I mean, I don't want to avoid it if it was. But.
And we'll be back in a moment.
To be part of the audience, please send a postcard to Donahue Tickets, care of NBC, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, New York, New York, 10112. Remember, postcards only, please.
The False Memory Syndrome Foundation has an 800 number. These are people who have been, as they claim, and you've heard just 3 stories here today, that their kids said they abused them when they were kids, and they didn't. The 800 number is 568-8882. These people are quite literally meeting convention-like, regularly. They go to some city and meet in a hotel and talk about, well, you know, what'd your kids say about you? Wait till I tell you about us. And they try to help each other reconcile with their children. These are older people often, not always, but often, sitting around a table looking like a Grant Wood painting. You know, Americana people, Norman Rockwell people. And their kids have said they abused them when they were children. You wanted to say?
There's one thing I wanted to say about managed health care, which is what's happening for most therapists today. We're limited to sometimes 20 or 30 sessions for an entire year. I'm not blaming it on this, but therapists tend to do brief therapy. We have to get people in and out, and I hope Hillary Clinton's listening to this, because you can't do that with this kind of an issue.
Mrs. Clinton agrees. The problem is the money, and, you know, you can't. Are you there, caller? Hi.
Yes, I do advocacy work for people who've been sexually abused and satanic ritually abused in the Boston area. And I have a point I want to raise about the False Memory Syndrome Society.
You'll make it briefly, please. We're about on the clock.
Yes, I will make it briefly. The point is this, is the False Memory Syndrome Society has an agenda to make it very difficult for therapists to treat people who need to do memory work.
Some kids are being forbidden to wear certain clothes to school. Are they being denied their right to free speech? Next, Donahue.
That last caller was trying to say that this attempt to accuse all makes it more difficult to heal those who are truly.
I'm not on one side or the other, but I am a body therapist. I do Reichian therapy, and I watch for signs to come out of the body. And a lot of times they do. A person will move in a certain way, but they come up with it themselves. I don't want anyone to think that you have to decline that someone is evidencing.
Services provided and promotional fees paid by the following.
Remington Swing Setter. This exclusive wax core heated roller system is the world's favorite for big, soft curls every time. The Swing Setter, now from Remington.
Before I started putting the adhesive on, the Super Poly Grip, I couldn't eat the heroes. I couldn't eat the apples. I couldn't eat the nuts.
Hold your dentures super tight with Super Polygrip.
You want regular Swiss cheese with all that fat and sodium? No, no. I'm giving you Alpine Lace Reduced Fat Swiss cheese because I care how you and you eat.